Welcome to Business Better, a podcast designed to help businesses navigate the new normal. I'm your host, John Wright. After serving nearly 15 years as Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Triumph Group Incorporated, a global aerospace component supplier, I'm now a member of the Securities and M&A groups at Ballard Spahr, a national law firm with clients across industries and across the country. This episode is another in our Women in Finance series and features a conversation with Jane Hyun, leadership strategist and author, and founder and president of Hyun & Associates, a professional training and coaching firm. Ms. Hyun talks about her background and career path, her books, and her thoughts on the challenges and experience of Asian Americans striving for success in the corporate environment. Speaking with Ms. Hyun is my Ballard Spahr colleague, Emilie Ninan, a partner in our Wilmington, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. offices, and co-chair of Ballard Spahr's finance department. Now let's listen to Emilie's conversation with Jane Hyun.
Jane, thank you so much for joining me today. I was actually trying to think back to when we first met, but I couldn't quite remember, when our paths first crossed.
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. And as I told you, I have this first edition hard copy of your book, which was published in 2005, and it's signed
first
by
printing.
That's right. And I do remember you coming to the South Asian Bar Association conference. I think it was in 2007 at my invitation to talk about the book. So I'm really glad we reconnected.
Yeah. Thanks so much for reaching out. It was great to hear from you again. And, comparing the pictures from 2007 and to the present, takes me back,
Yeah. I don't think we changed all that much. I think we did okay.
Not at all.
Well, thanks.
A little wiser, right? Yeah.
Jane, I wanted to start by asking you about your story. Give us some background on where you grew up and what you wanted to be as a little kid.
Yeah. So going back, I grew up in South Korea, and I grew up, therefore, in a very homogenous environment where everybody that I grew up with was Korean. There's really very little immigration to South Korea back in those times. So I had sort of... I didn't have a diversity experience. I had kind of a homogeneity experience, right? So I also grew up in a system where there's this tremendous respect for teachers in the school system. I was there until I was in second grade, and in a system that values teachers as well. So it was a really honorable profession, right? So I think that's maybe why when I was younger, I kind of wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be someone who can help kids and teach kids and bring them to this other place. And then, we moved to New York, and that was the American part of my life. And it was a very different experience, right? And I experienced firsthand what it's like to feel that dissonance of completely different cultural context in a multicultural society where there's different backgrounds, different expectations, different ways of being. And so those are the kind of things that I remember. And then, as I grew up and went to college, I remember a period of time where I wanted to do work internationally. I wanted to work in maybe, international relations or working with the UN or something like that. I always had this fascination with difference and travel and exploring. And maybe I wonder if it's kind of has to do with the experiences I had early on, right? This kind of culture shock of experience of experiencing something new, integrating into something, figuring out who I was going to be in this new context, and then helping people to do that. So to me, I see entering a new organization or a new country or culture as kind of this giant jigsaw puzzle that's waiting to be figured out. So that's kind of what I thought. I never imagined that it would turn into the work I do now. So that you brought me back to that.
So Jane, what took you from a graduate of Cornell with a degree in economics and international studies to career coach, HR consultant, diversity strategist to Fortune 500 companies, an author and sought out speaker on topics such as leadership and cultural fluency? Was it always part of your life plan?
Not at all. Not at all. And I think when I think about my career, I've taken more of a circuitous path actually. I don't think I could have planned it looking forward, but I think looking backward, it kind of makes sense, and I think about, 14 years or so in the corporate world, having experiences in business and HR, looking for threads as I've gone throughout them. And I think the threads that I saw was the work of empowering people and seeing the light bulb go off in others and creating change. And so gratified by the power of other people seeing more of themselves for who they are and realizing what that looks like. So I would say it definitely was not a straight path at all. It was, sometimes hard because I would kind of ask myself, I've done this, I've done well here, and I've learned this, and where do I go next? And I think that was the question that I continue to ask myself. But now I do feel like the work I'm doing is where I'm called to be. And I've never been more certain of it. Yeah. So we all get there.
Well, we're glad you're doing the work that you're doing. So glad you found your way here. But it's always great to hear people's stories. Well, let's talk about your first book, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, Career Strategies for Asians, the essential guide to getting in, moving up, and reaching the top. It was called groundbreaking at the time. And I have to say, I had not read anything like it when it came out 15 years ago. And I believe you first coined the phrase bamboo ceiling in recognition of the difficulty Asians were having breaking into management roles. Mm-hmm. As the author, what are the salient points of the book to you? And do you think those points are still relevant today?
Yeah. When I wrote that book, the desire that I had was, it was something I wanted to give to a younger version of myself. I had grown up and went through the corporate system, not knowing those rules, right? Not knowing how to navigate every corner, getting assignments or moving into different functions. And it wasn't something that our parents could teach us, right? Because they never went through this system, unlike some of my peers. And so, because I had to learn everything by myself, I didn't want others that came, behind me to have that same struggle, kind of experiencing all that. So it was really intended to do that. And then I also started, when I was writing the book, I had started doing coaching work, and I had started to coach Asian Americans and started to work with them as they were making major career transitions and experiencing some of these myself. So there was a lot of insight, a lot of interesting discoveries I was making from my own reflections, working in corporate America and working with leaders and executives, but also in helping and advising and coming alongside other Asian American professionals as well.
So you talk about the model minority myth, or Asians are known as the model minority. Why is the model minority a myth, and how and why do you think that myth can be limiting or damaging to the careers of Asian Americans?
Yeah, the model minority myth, it shows up in our workplaces too, right? And it's this misguided perception that Asian Americans, work hard, they're very capable, they put their heads down to become successful. And it's often been used historically as a myth used to pit Asians against other minority groups, right? And so it's not something that we gave to ourselves, right? But if you think about it, if you look at, in the past, what the media has covered, it's a lot of stories about, the Asians, those educated students, and, Asia takes the U.S. to town, those types of narratives around their overachievers and that kind of thing is really what you hear about. You never hear about, in New York City, Asians have the highest rates of poverty. That kind of stuff doesn't really make the news, right? It's not the kind of thing that people want to hear about, right? It's they want to hear something else. And so I think those are the kind of things that I think about. It often shows up when I work with even strangers that I meet, when I talk about what I do, or diversity leaders that I meet, that they often are not always aware that these differences exist and assume that they're doing okay, right? And so, and I think in our workplaces where you kind of need to be that squeaky wheel, right? You need to speak up, or you need to have communicated what you need. Oftentimes, we're kind of invisible, from a diversity point of view as well. So I think those are the kind of ways that the model minority myth shows up in our society, and then also in our workplaces.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting when we talk about the squeaky wheel, because we have a Asian American Business Resource Group here at our firm. And one of the discussions we had was about how different like Eastern culture and Western culture can be, and how in American Western culture, you're rewarded for being a squeaky wheel, but maybe in Asian culture, I think the saying is something like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a Japanese proverb, actually. Yeah. I mean, and what do you mean by that? When you say this, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, it's sort of emphasizing you kind of have to not make waves and go along with things. And it's not good to be too individualistic, right? And stand out too much. Whereas the squeaky wheel gets the grease, what do we imply by that? It's saying if you want to get something or if you want to change something, you need to speak up. And the concept that that your statements will make that change as well. So I think it's a very different way of identifying yourself, and then the actions that you take beyond that. So I think a lot of Asian Americans I meet can resonate with that when they think about even their families, and how group oriented and collective they are in our communities and families. That shows up too.
So when you're coaching someone, like how does someone get past what they've grown up thinking is the right way to approach, other people or their role? And then all of a sudden they come in and you're like, to be successful in the corporation you're in or the firm you're in, you need to speak up more. Like do you have any advice for someone who's finding themselves in that position?
Yeah, boy, we could have hours for that one. I think at some point, whether you're Asian or from a different culture altogether, and you're kind of now needing to succeed or navigate in this, North American dominant business culture, which has a certain set of rules and a certain set of behaviors that they're looking for you to demonstrate. I think it's important to think about what exactly do you want to accomplish in your organization, and what are some of these quote unquote rules or ways of being that they need you to be, and then think about how are you going to navigate in that. Because if we assume that we're going to be like, the white guy next to me, or, behave like everybody else does who are different from me, that's probably not going to be good for you, right? It's probably not going to be the easiest to put on. It's not going to be the clothes you want to wear in a way, right? So I think we need to figure out, we need to delve deep into ourselves and ask ourselves, who do we want to be, given that we have some of these cultural values that may be different or at odds with what the dominant culture is looking for you to demonstrate, and think about how do you want to demonstrate that. So I'm not saying you can't demonstrate those skills, but I think the way we do that and how we explore that needs to be something we need to take on for ourselves. And I think once we can do that, we're not emulating something that is difficult or too much of a stretch, but it's something that we feel we want to accomplish as well. We can also, I think, once we get the voice to, and once we get into positions of influence and authority, we can also change the rules, right? Who's to say that you have to be a certain way to be a leader, right? Who's to say that you can't get promoted with a different approach or a different style? I think sometimes it's hard to take those risks because we haven't seen it done. And so we don't have kind of a template to follow. So I think that's one other thing that I'm thinking about too, that could be possible as well.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of diversity in leadership, because there are different styles that can be successful. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about current events in the Asian community, especially during COVID. I saw a statistic that anti-Asian hate crimes increased 164% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the same period last year. I mean, has your work changed recently because of the increase in anti-Asian hate crimes? Like, what has been top of mind for your clients during this time?
Yeah, well, the work has continued. It hasn't gone away. This work I've been doing now for almost 18 years. But I think with the pandemic and the increase in anti-Asian hate crimes and just even like subtle acts of discrimination that you hear about as well, both subtle and also major, I think there has been a surge of interest focusing on the biases that Asian Americans have encountered. Now, these biases are not new, right? It's not something that somehow got invented in 2020, certainly not. And many of us have experienced these as kids, as young adults as well, and so have our parents. But the awareness, I think, has gone up because of the severity of some of the issues. I mean, the murders and just, the stuff that's on YouTube, right? That has been posted, I think, with the rise of social media, you can't hide, right? And you're seeing everything so in your face. I think a couple of observations that I've made lately is that it's the first time, I think, across sectors that Asian Americans are sharing their stories. I see in a consolidated way, right, where they're talking about their experiences with racism or discrimination as kids or as young adults, and definitely, what our parents dealt with too. I think many of us are very deeply concerned about our parents and grandparents, aunts and aunties and uncles, and all those vulnerable people that, due to cultural barriers or language barriers, they can't really defend themselves, and some of them are unlikely to want to report these cases. And I'm sure many of our parents experience a lot of this discrimination, but probably never said anything because they probably thought, well, this is what we should get, right? We don't know a lot about this culture, and it's something that we shouldn't complain about. So those kinds of things really break my heart. My mom passed away a few years ago, so even I definitely worried about my dad. It's like I told him not to go outside that much, and just the anxiety that you have, with that.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to not being the squeaky wheel, right? I think that's why people didn't complain and they didn't bring attention to what they were going through. But I'm so happy now that we're hearing more stories.
Yeah.
People. Yeah. And that was really important in our firm to hear from each other, how it was affecting people personally. And that was true for the African-American community too, during, after the George Floyd murder, but equally important in hearing the stories of our Asian colleagues and home, like you said about your dad. So
yeah, absolutely. Did you find that even in your organization, people rallied around to support some of your Asian attorneys and to really hear how it's impacting them?
Yeah. So our firm did it in 2 steps. So we had one meeting of the Asian lawyers where they could have like a safe space to really voice some of their concerns and, about family or things they're seeing in the news or whatever that would be. And then they would have a broader facilitated discussion so that, because like you said, a lot of people, it was going on, but no one knew about it. Like even took a long time for the press, right, to start reporting on it. And then we try to support organizations, that are helping to fight what's happening. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was heartbreaking to see all those incidents unfold, and now the awareness is definitely at that level where everybody's reporting on it. But yeah, for a while it was just sort of under the radar. Yeah.
I want to turn now to your other book, Flex, the new playbook for managing across differences, which examines the art of switching leadership styles to effectively communicate with people who are different from you, whether generationally, culturally, or I think you said across the gender divide. So from your perspective, what is that switch that needs to be made? And then I guess a follow-up, like as a leader, how do you stay true to yourself or feel you're being authentic if you have to switch up leadership styles?
Yeah, so flexing, as you said, is the art of switching between styles and using different approaches, like cultural and communication styles, when you are working and engaging with people who are not like you, different from you, right? So it's an intentional thing that you do. And like you said, it's not about fundamentally changing who you are, and becoming someone completely different. That's not that. It's more about growth and stretching your approaches and using different approaches and adjusting them in order to engage for that momentary situation or a temporary thing that you're doing, right? So yes, let's say if you need to use a more direct approach to be heard by an individual or group of people because your approach is maybe more subtle, right? Or less direct, than that person. You're doing it intentionally because you want to make sure that your message is heard and amplified, and you get your point across as well, right? And so versus if you're talking to someone who is also a little more indirect and perhaps as subtle as you can probably don't have to use as forceful a word to make that happen. So this can kind of come in a lot of different ways, from a client to service provider relationship, or even from a leadership capacity where you're giving feedback to your direct report or connecting with people about a project. I think this kind of flexing, I think, can be really useful in expanding your skills as a leader as well. So it's not about, okay, you can't be yourself anymore, right? It's kind of like, how do you add to your toolkit?
Yeah.
It may feel a little difficult in the beginning, right? Because you have to incorporate these approaches into your toolkit or repertoire. But as you do more of it, you're going to find that you're going to get more effective response from others. You would think that it would make sense, given that when you are preparing for meetings with clients, right, or customers, of course, you're going to be thinking, okay, so what kind of person is he? What kind of communicator is this person? How do we impress her, right? We think about all these things, different styles, different approaches. Are they cerebral? Are they, you know what I mean? Like, you think about all these different factors. But when it comes to internal, right, working with your team, we don't often think about flexing. And that's why we thought it's important to talk about this from a manager, employee, and colleague to colleague perspective as well. Yeah.
So would you say it's sort of an emotional intelligence, like just understanding the person being able to adapt to their personality, or sort of what?
Well, certainly being emotionally aware, or having that awareness of self and other awareness, that's actually one of the characteristics, is part of it. But I think it's also understanding these cultural nuances, right? So if you're aware of, let's say, power distance, right? Are you aware, for example, we talk a lot about power distance is the amount of social distance you have between people in positions of authority and yourself. So if you have a more egalitarian, more participative kind of approach, you as an employee are expecting your manager or senior leader, the title is there and they're more senior to you, but the way you interact with them is informal. You expect that you can challenge them, you can debate with them and have these exchanges. Whereas if you have more of a hierarchical orientation, you may not feel comfortable with that, right? It's kind of like, well, he's like the managing partner, or she's the senior vice president and the head of this group. Like, how can I challenge what she's saying, right? It's that, and it goes back to, my time in South Korea. Like, I grew up in a very hierarchical system, starting with the family, but also in the school system, where if someone is two weeks older than you, you call her big sister, right, or big brother, right? There is a hierarchy to that, and so I think some of these cultural values do play out, I think, in the workplace if you're not aware of it, and I think flexing is being aware of, let's say, certainly, being emotionally aware of different people's styles, but also around those types of differences as well, and what could be driving your team member who may have a different power distance dynamic than your expectation of them.
Yeah, that another cultural part of being Asian is that deference to age and experience. And I've talked about that before, that it always was difficult for me when I was speaking to a partner. When I was a junior associate and the partner's as old as my father, I could never say, like, that's not right. We don't do that. And then by not saying that, they thought I wasn't confident in what I thought should be done. So there's
exactly.
Like communication.
Exactly. I know they're kind of like, yeah, I want you to like challenge my thinking, like, help me think, better and smarter. And we're thinking like, but we're not supposed to do that, right? Yeah, totally. I can definitely relate to that. And I remember people that I worked for, wanting to, to engage and like wrestle with you like that. And then if they were so experienced and really good at what they do, like they're well known for that, it was hard for me, to do that. And it took a lot of prodding and feedback and encouragement to get that courage to do that as well. Yeah.
The one thing I did want to follow up on, Jay, is you talked about identifying your skills and what you're good at. I generally believe you can learn almost anything, like that even leadership skills and, this whole thing of like, are you born leader or can you be developed one? But I wanted to get your opinion on, are you one that believes like you should focus more on what you're good at, as opposed to taking up time with the things that are more of a challenge? Like, I've heard people have different perspectives on this.
Hmm. I think there are different perspectives on it, and there's probably no one way to answer that. I think you do need to figure out your core skills. We call, in Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, we call them motivated skills, and we all have them. And so identifying what it is that you are good at and that you're skilled in, and that you get a sense of accomplishment from when you're doing it. I think those are important skills to know how to do, because I think as far as finding work where you feel you have some expertise in, you have to have some set of motivated skills that are playing into that, and then I think you can stretch and take yourselves out of that comfort zone too. So I think it kind of goes back and forth, right? It's sort of how do you learn those new skills, and if the skills are broad enough, can you apply that in different settings, in different organizational contexts? Can you lead safaris, with some of the skills that you learned? Probably, right? And could you lead a team of people who do R&D for a pharmaceutical company with some of those skills you've developed? So yeah, it's kind of taking some of those skills and seeing how the threads come together. And then, of course, like you said, how do you stretch yourself to go out of that comfort zone when you need to in areas that you have? Yeah. I think this, if you could take yourselves out of your comfort zone sooner than later, I do feel like, once, you get settled into a career and you don't take those opportunities, it's difficult, right? It's just like, you and I, it's harder for me to learn a new skill now than it was 20 years ago, so, that kind of flexibility or that kind of elasticity in how that works. Yeah. But the brain, they often say, your brain needs to continue to work, and I know my mother-in-law, she often does like those Sudoku puzzles and stuff, but she doesn't want to get Alzheimer's, she wants to continue to use her brain. How do we keep doing that? I think once you lose that, it becomes very difficult to work with a new concept or an idea, right? Yeah. So, the more we can encourage that, and the more we can cultivate an environment where it's okay to do that, and it's okay to learn. It's not bad to be, imperfect when you try something. I think that kind of environment is sometimes tough to get, right? Unless you intentionally look for that kind of environment and cultivate that from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot, that phrase, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And I've been really trying to take that to heart, because I think it's hard when you've trained as a young lawyer where the details, not that I'm not detail oriented, but sometimes we're not willing to let things go until it's really, really perfect. And
yeah, that's a good point. Well, that's a good question to ask. Like, what does it look like in a legal environment? Because you're right. There's certain things that you can't let fall through the cracks if your job is to review documents and make sure that you didn't miss anything. But how do you exercise the learning in that environment? So that's something to think about.
So we've been working from home for nearly 16 months. What are your thoughts on remote work and potential office reopenings? We actually heard this week that our firm is going to be opening without restriction on October 4th. But at present, it seems to me that probably most law firms will be hybrid in some way, including us. And we probably will never go back to pre-COVID, where it was 5 days a week. So, and it's very interesting to me because I have some folks in my department that have felt really isolated, quarantining alone. And then on the other end, I've been reading articles of people quitting their jobs rather than going back to the office. So it's all fluid. But what are you seeing, and what advice do you have on this topic?
Yeah. No, I've been reading a lot of that too, Emily, and it's been really compelling to see like the extremes of what people are experiencing. I've also hearing about a lot of anxiety and people being depressed, being isolated too. I think that's definitely real. I think like you, I see very few companies mandating that everybody needs to be back in the office by September 1. I don't see that kind of sweeping thing that they're asking for. So I do think, like you said, coming in a couple of days a week, as business requirements need, that kind of flexibility is going to be more of the norm than the exception. And I think that there are some that are going to be able to work from home indefinitely, right? If if you feel like most of your work can be done virtually and it doesn't interrupt with kind of your essential requirements, that's done. So I think there's a case to be made for this virtual option to be another normal. But I do think, for me, living in New York, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing people again and coming in sometimes and sometimes being virtual. And so if there's a lot of people in New York that are living in very small apartments that are dying to get out. And so I think having some sort of flexibility built into those approaches, I think will be good. I think the other piece to think about is safety. I think about, these incidents are still happening. It's not in the past, it's present as well. So I know among my Asian American peers and friends that there is still anxiety about going out there. What time can they be on the subway? Should they go by themselves? Is it safe? Public transportation, so on, right? So if there's a certain percentage of your workforce that is reliant on public transportation and there is some fear and anxiety, I think giving people room to express those feelings and not assuming that people are just not coming in because they don't want to come in, right? I think would be important. Yeah. Because I think if I'm thinking about it, I'm sure everybody else is as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's harder in the larger cities where you are dependent on public transportation versus being able to just drive in. I mean, ideally for me, I'd like to wake up in the morning and decide if I want to stay at home or go to the office, but I don't think
right. Is this a work from home day or is it a Zoom day? Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's, if anything, it's given organizations the positive proof that it can be done. I don't think there's any organization that's going to say, oh, that's not possible, right? Like you have to come into the office. So I think that it's opened up another way to work, which I think could be good.
Yeah, I think for us, the concern is really the more junior lawyers, the training that happens when you're with other people in the office or seeing more senior lawyers working. I think we've been doing a decent job onboarding people, but I think that professional development piece is what we're worried about.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too. And especially when people are new or they're junior, they're just starting out, they really need to be shadowing and working with people who have experience and, not just in the bigger aspects of decision making and work, but really in the little things too, right? Like, how do you do this? And how will you make this kind of a phone call? I mean, those types of things, watching someone do that and going to a meeting with someone, those are invaluable. So I agree with you. I think it's important for that and also building the rapport, the relationship. It's hard to do that on if you've only done it on Zoom.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. So, Jane, I'm going to end with this question. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I would say find mentors that will be helpful to you and make sure you cultivate that and be proactive about cultivating that. You need a network of people to enable your success. And what you need may change over time, but it's really important to think about this in your legal career, I would imagine, and long-term as well. I think the other thing I would say is find out what you're good at in your work. And so everybody has unique gifting and unique skills. And so, instead of saying I'm good at communication, what kind of communicator are you and what type of skills do you offer that are different from others? And be specific about it. Are you really good with conflict and navigating around that? Are you really effective at conveying a story, to a client? Are you really good at giving feedback and providing that in a very clear and concise way? Are you good at organizing your thoughts, right? These are all different types of ways to communicate and be well. So I think the sooner you can understand what you are good at and what you want to develop further, I think you can have a better sense of what you want to focus on as well. So that's what I would say, as soon as you can. Of course, you're going to always be learning and you're not going to be perfect at it, but really be cultivating those types of skills and, find areas that you can learn from and build. I think being a constant learner, I think that's the thing that's good for us all. I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot.
Yeah, I learn something new every day. And today I
Absolutely.
learned several things from you. So thank you, Jane. Thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, it was great to be with you again, Emily. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks again to Emilie Ninan and Jane Hyun. Make sure to visit our website, www.ballardspar.com, where you can find the latest news and guidance from our attorneys. Subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, please email podcast@ballardspar.com. Stay tuned for a new episode coming soon. Thank you for listening.